Əziz tamaşaçılar, siz geosiyasət verilişinə baxırsınız. Biz bugün beynəlxalq Qızıl Xaç Komitəsi haqqında danışacağıq, beynəlxalq hüquq barəsində və beynəlxalq humanitar hüquq barəsində danışacağıq. Bizimki verilişimizin qonağı beynəlxalq Qırmızı Xaç Komitəsinin Bakı nümayəndəliyinin rəhbəri xanım Arian BAUER'dir. Thank you very much for accepting us.
Thank you, Emil.
It's a pleasure to see you and really appreciate your time because I know it's difficult and current now. It's a very difficult time to keep you busy for that. For sure, we discuss about ICRC. Many humanitarian organizations involved in the process of post-war recovery, war recovery, ceasefire. And sometimes it is difficult for civilians to separate the mandate of ICRC from UN. I would like to ask you, can you tell us what is the main mandate and the goals of ICRC?
Thank you very much. The International Committee of the Red Cross is actually one of the oldest humanitarian organizations in the world, over 150 years old. So we have a long tradition to work in difficult places, and those places are mostly countries that have been affected by wars. So we have a very specific mandate that derives from the Geneva Conventions to protect and assist the population and those who are affected by the fighting. And we do that in many different ways. Maybe the most visible thing we do in many countries and where humanitarian aid is the most known is, of course, looking after the livelihoods of people, providing food, medicines to hospitals, working on sanitary equipment and things like that. As the ICRC, we have something that maybe differentiates us from many other organizations who also work in the humanitarian field, which is what we do in the field of disseminating international humanitarian law, engaging with the different parties to the conflict that we're looking at about international humanitarian law, and to follow up people who are particularly affected by that. That may be people detained, that may be people who are separated from their families. It's the issue of the missing people, and it's also about monitoring how a war is being conducted and engaging with the parties in order for the situation for the civilians in the end to improve. So this is in short what the ICRC does around the world, and specifically also in the Southern Caucasus and in Azerbaijan.
Actually, we have a difficult time. When we arrived, we just exactly came to the port of this military operations for within UN resolutions for liberating the areas. And what do you think? What is the activity of ICRC before that and nowadays? What are the differences you see? What are the challenges you can face in the future here in Azerbaijan?
We have a very long-standing history, unfortunately, in Azerbaijan. I say unfortunately because, of course, that means that people have been affected by the consequences of the conflict for so many years. So the ICRC has been present since 1992, and we have continuously had activities in the humanitarian sphere for people affected. We have been working in prisons in Azerbaijan, following up on people detained. We have been along the line of contact area, carrying out humanitarian activities in the field of promotion of agriculture, water, sanitation, education for children, support to health structures. And in that sphere we have had a very good dialogue also with the Azerbaijani authorities, sharing what we saw, what we continue to see, and also to share our experiences to in the end improve the situation for the population. Now, of course, 6 weeks ago the situation changed quite importantly. What became also a big issue, and where we, as well as the civilian population, of course, were very much affected, was security. It's very well known that the areas around the line of contact are very highly densely populated. And what was of high concern to us and continues to be was the fact that urban areas were being shelled and population was really affected by that, and many of them paid with their own lives. So with the onset of the escalation as of the end of September, we have been developing a lot of activities with the local authorities, the district communities, to provide cash assistance to people who have moved to safer areas. We have been working on improving sanitation in places where those people were gathering, and we also have been working a lot on provision of mental health support with our psychologists, but also on disseminating information on how to behave in such dangerous areas, because obviously when shells hit the ground, it's best not to be in the streets, to be in a safe area. So we are also providing information on how to behave in those dangerous areas, hoping of course that this will decrease the number of civilian casualties.
Actually, this is always a problem. Main target is the civilians, that children and women, that and humanitarian organizations doing their best to mitigate the risks and to decrease the number of casualties. You just mentioned about cooperation with state authorities, and I know ICRC doing a great job for cooperation with State Committee for Missing Persons and Prisoners of the War. For sure, this is mandate which just carried by all ICRC internationally, because it's delegated by Geneva Convention. What can you tell about your cooperation with State Committee for Missing People in Azerbaijan?
We are indeed in very tight collaboration and coordination with the State Commission for Prisoners of War, Missing People, and this collaboration has been standing over the last years. Before the current escalation, one of the big files that we were tackling with the State Commission was the one of the missing people still coming from the 1990s war. We also were continuing to work with them on issues of prisoners of war or people detained in link with the conflict. And one very important role that I haven't mentioned so far of the ICRC is the one of neutral intermediary. So as the ICRC is a neutral, impartial organization, we are in a position to be present and active and have a network on all sides linked to a conflict. And in this particular situation here, we have been able to be instrumental in supporting the authorities when they agree to repatriate human remains, to repatriate prisoners of war or civilians, and to support them in that process. It's very important for us to be able to do that. I think it's a unique position that the ICRC has, as you said, worldwide. But it's also a means to to close a number of files. Especially the missing file is one that is of high emotional value, where people, civilians, pay a high emotional price. When your father, your brother, your son has gone missing, and you don't know what happened to him, it's certainly something that affects the family at its core, and what we see is oftentimes over generations. A colleague of mine mentioned to me a story, that children who had never seen their father because they were so small when he was killed were actually measuring his trousers when they found them to just have an idea of what the size of their father was in reality. And so those are just examples that show how much families are affected and how much this is something, an issue that sometimes is forgotten by the general public, but that causes a lot of pain to those affected. One
of the points that we just talked about, Ariana, is humanitarian assistance, that coordination, because for sure when war started or conflict going on, many organizations involved. I mean, like UN, ICRC, some international NGOs, and it's difficult to coordinate. For sure, this is sometimes the measures between them not always visible, who will do what. How you coordinate that? Because you're a practitioner, I know you used to work in many countries, you used to work in Ukraine, you was running Middle East portfolio as well. Based on your practice, how you coordinate activity of ICRC with other well-known international organizations, how you share your mandate?
It's a very important point, because in the end the means for everybody are limited, and as humanitarian organizations our objective must be to serve as many people as possible, and to avoid for someone to receive 2 or 3 times and the person next to him or her to receive nothing. So coordination is indeed key, and we work together on different levels. Of course, in the field, as we call it, closely with other organizations to coordinate where we intervene. One very important partner of us here in Azerbaijan is the Azerbaijani Red Crescent Society, where we have common programs, and we have been supporting them also for many years, and they have been key also in the current situation to provide much needed assistance to the population in the areas affected by the fighting.
For last time we discussed about ceasefire agreement, that last one, and for sure it's a great achievement that war stopped. Peacekeeper will come, and there will be certain IHL-related activities that covers return of the war prisoners, return of the IDPs, that will keep involvement of UNHCR, I mean High Commissioner for Refugees of UN, and for sure when you talk about war prisoners, it is ICRC and missing people. How you see future of this cooperation in Azerbaijan with state officials, with international organizations, because behind all this agreement, big job actually, we say that big activities will run behind of this in coming future. And for sure, role of ICRC very important, because ICRC has a very high reputation of impartiality, professionalism, and for sure ICRC is a Geneva Convention, it's an international humanitarian law that fully under the mandate of ICRC.
I think the issue of the missing will certainly be an issue that will be following us, unfortunately, for the coming time. We have approached the sides to express our readiness, of course, to carry out our role as neutral intermediary. But beyond just being a neutral intermediary who helps people and human remains to go back to their families, there is also a lot of technical work to be done. And this is also where we engage with authorities up front, because in order to prevent people from going missing, that means in order to increase chances, for instance, that a person can be identified, already a lot of things can be done in forefront when the human remains are retrieved from the field, for instance, that the information is taken about the whereabouts of where the remains were found, and that the process is documented properly, so that in the end the information is also available, so that the competent authorities can do their maximum to identify those people and prevent in the end the suffering that I was mentioning earlier on, of families not knowing what happened to their loved ones. So for us, there is a lot of work coming up, and we are in daily contact with the Azerbaijani authorities on that. Same thing on the other side, I must say, we have an office also in Yerevan, we have an office in Khankendi. So this allows us to do the same type of work on all sides and to, in the end, hopefully, to be able to support to the maximum the civilian population.
Another point that nowadays discussed in press and media, that for sure peacekeeper forces deployed. And currently, yesterday and today, the UN Security Council was gathered, and permanent member Russia makes some reporting about mandate of peacekeeping forces. For sure, from my own practice, in Bosnia, some countries, peacekeeper forces are always efficient. In some countries, they're efficient, and always at the end, it comes to the level of knowledge of IHL, international humanitarian law. When you see how the peacekeeper trained, this is one of the first requirements. They should be fully integrated, fully aware about international humanitarian law, or law of the war, military like to say. Does it, we not talk about Azerbaijan, just talk about generic things to get more information how it is going, how the process. Does it require ICRC when they deployed in the country to also monitor of the activity of peacekeepers, of the level of awareness about IHL?
So what we certainly do is to engage with all the armed forces in the world almost on the training of international humanitarian law. So it's a very important point that you mentioned. We also work with international troops that are deployed to international contexts because them as well, they are weapon bearers and they need to know what is IHL. Yes, we do train those people, and we are in contact with the different states that are sending international troops abroad.
Another main point that I can just share with you from my own practice in some Balkans and the Middle East, that was activity of ICRC related to the explosive readiness of war. That was said main obstacle of the development of the region after the war. It is issue of ERW, that civilians affected, that they cannot keep this land, to use the land, and it affects economical development of the affected areas. And ICRC provides very good package and good knowledge about mine-risk education, certain clearance process as well, that involvement, full integration of ICRC. You work in Georgia, in Armenia, and Azerbaijan. You work in Ukraine. Your last assignment, for sure, all of them parts of CIS countries that has a so-called frozen conflicts in before it was. And how you see your mandate in Azerbaijan for activities related to the explosive readiness of war, of landmines and cluster munitions, or other conventional weapons?
For sure, there is also work to be done in that field. In that respect, we are in contact with the competent Azerbaijani authorities and organizations, with ANAMA, of course, first and foremost, also with the Ministry of Defense. It's key for us to address this issue. I think the consequences of contaminated areas, especially those that are important for the livelihoods of the people, and we're talking about fields for the farmers, we're talking about schools for the children, roads, that are used by vehicles, cargo, etc. All those areas need to be made safe for the civilian population to be able to resume a normal life, for the children to go back to school, for economic activities to resume. In so many places we see long-term consequences on the economic side, of course, but also on the mere physical side of people, where farmers, after many years after a conflict, may still step on a mine, may still step on something that will explode, and they may lose a leg or even worse, their lives. So we oftentimes couple such activities, of course, with awareness raising, so that children, civilians are aware of the risk, And in some countries, we also have programs that are really designed at those who were really directly affected, be it economically, to help them recover, and when they were affected physically, we also have programs in the field of orthopedic education, physical re-education, for those people to be able to resume a life as normal as possible.
I remember maybe 10 years ago, ICRC built in Azerbaijan a very big and very nice modern orthopedic center that was at the end handed over to the Ministry of Rehabilitation and Social Protection. So I think it was a great job. I just recently read one article about ICRC before I come to our program, try to get more information about current issues.
Yeah.
And there was one nice article, an interesting article of the chairman of ICRC, that there is some tendency around the world that local conflicts, that respect of IHL and the Geneva Convention was decreasing, unfortunately, because of global crisis, because of global conflicts. And what do you think, what was the reason that for the last 10 years there wasn't such a big respect of Geneva Convention, IHL?
That's a big question, but I think what we
sure.
see is that the number of conflicts and maybe more importantly the number of people who are directly affected by the conflict, who have fled areas such as Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, Nigeria, are really increasing, and it's also the long-term consequences actually of those wars. It's not only about a war happening, but it's also about the duration of the wars, where we see that in some places we have been in a very active mode for the last 10, 20 years. So you can imagine how much that really impacts the population. IHL remains key. It remains key that those who carry weapons are informed about what is international humanitarian law, that and that the maximum is done by their hierarchies and by the international community for international humanitarian law to be respected.
Another problem for that came to agenda after end of 90s, it is child soldiers that for sure it's come after some Rwanda, I think, other countries, and it was already a problem that was highlighted by ICRC and UN, especially reported by child soldiers with resolution of United Nations Security Council. A new tool of that used by warlords and parties of the war that. And so far, this process is still going on despite the convention was adopted. And as we discussed, human factors completely challenges this issue. What do you think? What is the main problem with child soldiers, and what could be effective measures? Just not for sure, not talk about exact things because it's difficult. It should be done by special research. If people can get the answer, it can be stopped. But so far as they know, reduction of process, there's not much comparison with 90s. But this problem still exists, and it's one of the painful issues of the war that child use the soldiers, because conventional obligation. How we manage within ICRC child soldiers issues, because soldiers should be people of certain age.
Yes, unfortunately, it's a reality in many conflicts around the world, and the ICRC has developed specific programs for children, actually in conjunction with a number of UN organizations as well, because it's such a broad topic, and we get involved very much when it's about bringing back those children to their families. That's where the ICRC has a very active role to play. Of course, it's part of the dialogue that we have in different countries with regards to the respect of international conventions and international humanitarian law. So we have a number of areas in which we intervene with regards to child soldiers, yes.
And another treaty that I was just recently tried to review, that ICRC was initiating that and really doing a great job, that from my personal opinion, that to stop, to reduce this and put on the right track, international trade treaty that I see fully involved with, and try to systematize that countries purchasing the weapons. And how you see future of this treaty? Because not many countries join this treaty, and it's become part of the business, big business, and another problem of controls of the weapons and the armored munitions and other military means that used in the war. For sure, there are some organizations like DCAF, Democratic Control of Armed Forces, but so far there are no straight and no efficient mechanism to control purchase of the weapons. Based on your personal experience, on personal view, for sure, I understand you cannot move out of certain direction to tell about, because we talk about ICRC, but what do you think, how the treaty could be implemented, taking account previous challenges and lessons learned?
Well, I'm not a legal specialist, unfortunately, and not a specialist on international treaties, but I think those treaties are definitely important for such heavy issues to be raised and to be solved at an international level, because oftentimes such issues can be tackled by one state or two, but the problem is way bigger, and it needs an international coordination. It needs international implications with regards to those issues. As ICRC, as you mentioned, we are involved in developing such new bodies of law. We are certainly also invited often to comment on such new treaties. But then the implementation is, of course, part of the duties of the states who are signatories of those treaties. So this is where the states have to take an active stance and do what they need to do in order to comply.
Talk about treaty of international trade of weapons. Just for sure, one of the main agenda of ICRC was ban landmines. That ICRC did a great job. We talk about Ottawa Treaty. For sure, there are other couple of other intergovernmental treaties like certain conventional weapons, but for sure, ban landmines, which is Ottawa Treaty, quite efficient one. It's full ban of landmines. And so far, because of our conflict in Azerbaijan, we're faced with these issues of landmines, and we will face, unfortunately, in the future as well, because it's remnants of the war. Another issue of the weapons and come to agenda is agenda of Oslo Treaty of cluster munitions. That thanks to international organizations, UN, ICRC, it's adopted in Oslo, but so far it's not followed by all countries, because cluster munitions is one of the painful weapons for the civilians, and usually mainly civilians impacted by this one. How you see the role of ICRC in advocacy for these mentioned conventions?
I think the role that we can play is to raise awareness on the issue, on the consequences of the use of such weapons. But then, the signature has to come from the states, and I think this is also where the diplomatic community has a role to play, to make sure that the number of states who ratify such treaties increase. I think the international community depends on that, and it's their role also.
Yeah, I asked this question because for sure, recent conflict we saw that it was used cluster munitions, and when we talk with people, said, okay, this is destroyed. I say no, this is problem will remain for other years because cluster munitions has a habit to spread around and not all of them exploded. It means even it used, but it will still keep echoing in many years. This is a problem that I'm sure that ICRC doing a great job to reduce and keep people aware about that issues. It will go from the mine awareness program for sure. I think ICRC will do mine awareness. Do you plan to implement mine risk education, a mine awareness program in Azerbaijan as well?
It's a program that we can offer. We are already working on a smaller scale, I would say, in communities on this issue. Over the years, we have been doing sensitization in schools on mine risk awareness. And in the current situation, I'm afraid this type of activity will certainly not decrease.
I remember one of the great idea and great work was done by CRC. It is child playground. You just implement certain places for children in the war-affected areas, and I really was impressed by this in Bosnia. I mean, it was attempt in Georgia, I think. We're coming to our last question. I know that you used to work in Ukraine, and Ukraine, one of the latest conflict in post-Soviet area that set in beginning that we are post-Soviet countries, but we have also some common things. It's our conflicts that after collapse of Soviet Union we had to face within our borders. It is for sure it's conflict that takes the life of the people, and our concerns nowadays it's civilians that affected and unfortunately will be affected in many years after the conflicts, because war start and even war stopped, but consequences can follow for many years, and we discuss about Ukraine, about consequences of the Second World War, that was remnants of war that exist. And you had a great experience in Ukraine, because I know you was managing one of the area, which is in Donbass, it's not wrong, one of the hard areas that you face there. And what do you think, how your experience can be useful for Azerbaijan?
I think, and that's maybe unfortunately, that indeed the year and a half that I spent in eastern Ukraine was quite useful in the last 6 weeks for me personally here. Of course, in a new conflict or in a new escalation, it takes a lot for, well, firstly, you know, the people will be running away from the areas where hostilities happen, and in those situations, security, I must say, is often one of the biggest challenges to manage, because needs are huge. Sometimes we have people standing in front of our office waiting for aid, and we have to get organized as well in order to be able to respond. So together with our team here in Baku, and we also have an office in Barda, we have our office in Khankendi and Erevan, we have really stepped up our response. It took a couple of days, of course, I think, for everybody to realize what was happening, but we were very quick in being able to bring in additional staff, to bring in cargo in Azerbaijan, with the great support also of the Azerbaijani authorities, in order to be an efficient responder to the crisis. So unfortunately, yes, this is part of our job, and you learn it very often in crisis situations. So in that respect, my experience in Donetsk was quite useful, yes.
And last question, more protocol-related question. How you see the future of relations with ICRC in Azerbaijan and Azerbaijani authorities and Azerbaijani government? What novelties you can bring? What is ideas you can bring to make efficient job of ICRC more efficient, more visible?
We will continue certainly to engage with the Azerbaijani authorities at different levels with different types of expertise. We spoke about the missing issue today. I think this is a field where we have a lot of expertise to share from other conflicts, from other areas. We have a lot of professionals in that field that can be of support. In the field of well, if I may say so, as we have been present in Barda for so many years, we also know the area, the challenges there quite well. And we will certainly engage with the Azerbaijani authorities in the coming weeks and months on sharing positions, on sharing ways that we feel we can best support the population when they return to their houses. My colleagues in Barda are saying, they were able to do first trips to the areas really directly affected by the fighting over the last weeks. And with the ceasefire now, the situation seems to stabilize. People seem to return to houses, but that are destroyed or damaged. So we will certainly be intervening in that field as quickly as possible. Winter is coming. So time is of the essence as well, and we will do our utmost to help the people there.
Thank you very much, Ariana. It was
Thank you,
an
Emil.
interesting talk. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your interest.
Əziz tamaşaçılar, biz bugün Beynəlxalq Qızılxaç Komitəsinin Bakı üzrə rəhbəri xanım Arian BAUER-la danışdıq və mən əminəm ki, bizimki söhbətimiz beynəlxalq hüquqdan oldu və siz bunu bəyəndiniz. Gələn görüşlərə dək.